Hi, welcome to Self-Generated. My name's Steve. We're wrapping up our exploration of perception. And what we've done is try to frame the idea that what you perceive, including seeing me, hearing me, experiencing me right now, is more a generation of your making than it is a reflection of what's happening in the real world. And that sounds like a real complex philosophical conversation, but there's a real truth behind it, that breaking it down and experiencing it for yourself through your own perceptions is a very powerful, empowering idea. And that for me to change from being a raging alcoholic and asshole to just a functional asshole, I was able to only really do that by changing how I interpreted my perceptions, how I saw, tasted, smelt, dealt it, everything. And what I'm talking about is that, for example, when it comes to vision, that it's not just this passive reception. There's not just a little you sitting in your head watching a movie screen of what is a mirror reflection of what's happening outside. It's an interpretation of what's happening outside, not just of the light, but what we've experienced in the past. And so, for example, the checker shadow illusion, you see a checkerboard, it has something casting a shadow, one gray looks darker than the other, right? Well, the grays are the same. When I put up a bar to show that the grays are the same exact gray, it breaks the illusion. You see that your experience of one being darker than the other is not true, but it doesn't matter. That this visual illusion is not a fluky, haha, isn't that funny? It's a representation of how you actually work. That your experience, how you fundamentally take things in, how you perceive them, is more, or just as importantly, what you believe it is and the models you've built than what it actually is in the real world. These things smell and taste. They're not just mirrors of the reality of the molecules in the food or in the air that smells can get used to, that things that might be awful to one person are nice to another. It's not how they're wired, it's how they're modeled. That if you taste your home cooked meal and it's the best thing ever and you have somebody else try it and they don't like it, they're not just an asshole for that. They don't have bad taste for that. Well, maybe the food is bad, but it's not just because of that. You can't just assume it's your taste of the home cooked meal is in no small part shaped by your emotional model of that. What mom's or grandma's cooking or dad's cooking, what that means to you, changes the way you experience it. Just as much as if I gave you your favorite meal and you're about to be executed, or that you were in a bathroom at some concert that was just totally trashed and it was just an awful experience, it wouldn't taste the same. The experience wouldn't be the same, because it's not just a mirror of reality. The touch, which is one of the most important ones we can think of, at least when we're physically connected to something in the real world, no matter how we want to look at it, it is still experienced fundamentally within the mind. And that's why we have phantom limb, and that's why we have things like the rubber hand illusion, which is your own little mini version of the phantom limb, through things just as simple as visual and tactile feedback, repetitive. Just like this, over time, the person who's having this done, the stroking of the hand, the stroking of the fake hand, the rubber hand, the person can experience the touch on the fake hand. They can experience threat to the fake hand, just as if it was the real hand. They'll pull their hand back. They'll pull their real hand back when the fake hand is threatened, innately, instinctually. Because your experience, you can experience something that's totally not happening to you, that's totally not real. You can't feel that fake hand. It's not magic. It's that your experience is generated from and of your expectations meeting the sensory information, not just the sensory information. So that's why this guy's not stupid, or these people aren't stupid when they're going through the rubber hand illusion and pull their hand back when the hand is threatened by being smashed, or that they feel or sense an experience of touch when their hand is physically not being touched, the fake hand is being touched, because we model our world, our experiences based off of those things. And that any way you want to cut it, auditory, any other which way, our introception, which is a series of perceptions that we don't necessarily think of, but that's how you manage yourself, how you know you're thirsty, you're hot, you're tired, you're hungry, you feel sick. These are perceptions based off of sensory information coming from your body to your brain and your expectations. Lisa Feldman Barrett references in an interview, I'll try to find it, where she talks about that she has the difficulty of discerning if she's in love, but she actually had the flu. That we can have these butterflies in the stomach, we can have these sensations where you feel lightheaded, and we can interpret it in different ways. And that a lot of these experiences are not hardwired, they're modeled. And so that's why there's variability. That's why there's difficulty in understanding it. That's why literally, and no, literally, we kind of live in our own realities. There's no way around that. And that you are not the center of the universe. I'm not the center of the universe. We live in a universe together, but we are certainly centers of our own universe, our own little conscious island, that the only way we can interact with each other in any meaningful way by sharing ideas is through language and a few other things, but mainly through language is how we can do it in a complex manner. And language just doesn't always match up very, very well to what's going on inside. And that our perceptions we experience guide us and drive us. And that they're not as static as we think, because people can have variability. Somebody who's blind, somebody who's deaf, they're just as human as you and I. They can be just as functional as you and I. They might not be able to drive or do one thing or the other, but they're not less human, because our perceptions and what makes us us is variable and can be altered and can be trained. And that things like, if you've ever heard of it, synesthesia, it's where people will experience color or smell or other ideas that are counterintuitive how you and I would perceive things, but say a color with a number or a letter, or experiencing time as shapes and patterns. And that we would think of that as kind of weird, or maybe they're messed up, but it's just another reflection that these people can still work, function in life. And it's just that our perceptions, are how we shape and interpret reality, is very variable. And we can function just as well as anybody else, having a completely different setup inside, like aphantasia. And if you're not familiar with that, that's the idea that you can't visualize images. If you have that, if you're not able to visualize things, put that in the comments. Supposedly it might be as around 10% of the population, and it's a relatively new phenomena that we found. It's not new to us. It's new that because, again, we haven't really discussed how we actually work in a real meaningful, truthful, honest way that reflects reality, that this is a new foundation. This is a new finding, even though it's probably how we've always been. And that same not being able to visualize an image, or can also go to people who don't have an internal monologue. Again, if you don't have an internal monologue, go ahead and put that in the comments. Or if you've never heard of that before, put it in the comments, because I'm surprised it's kind of been out there for a little while, but a lot of people aren't exposed to this information and don't realize that not everybody has an internal monologue, or that a lot of people believe that everybody can hear literal words being spoken in their head when they're thinking thoughts. And that there's many people who don't have that, but they function. It's not that these are the people who are damaged. These are just normal, everyday people who didn't even realize that this wasn't happening to them, and that they're still able to function because of the variability. Because again, we are not built or meant to act within reality 100% as is. We're meant to act within how we interpret it. It's probably why social animals and working together even are a thing. All of these things seem to be just how it works. That there's all of this variability because it's not so static. These aren't weirdos and the offshoots with no internal monologue and aphantasia. Like they still function, they still work. And that's because all experience, all perception is not the projection of what's happening outside, it's the interpretation. It's modeled. And we can model it in all sorts of ways that allow us to be functional. That's why you see crazy people that are out there in the world doing all this crazy shit, but guess what? They're still functioning, they're still there. Very rarely does somebody stop to the point where they're no longer able to continue to care for themselves. And it's crazy. You go, well, how the hell can that work? But we are exceedingly versatile in the way we can interact with each other in the world. Perceptions. When it comes to all of our perceptions, that you can't just cut the line at just the senses. Like we talked about how interoception, there's all these other layers to what we actually experience. Emotions, all these things, they're not different circuits. They're all part of the same generation. That's why you experience hearing me as I talk, not after the fact. It's all put in together. And that, again, what you already believe, what you already know, is just as important as what's actually happening. And so that when something happens, somebody cuts you off, somebody says something that's absolutely against what you believe to be true, that there's a challenge that one feels, and that we deal with that challenge by agreeing with other people that this person is what we believe they are. Maybe, man, this guy's an asshole, doing it online, watching other content or media that reinforces our belief that this person is an asshole. What I'm saying is that's not just you liking what you like. That's a reflection of being a creature of active inference, embodied cognition, the extended mind, that models its world. And if we don't pause and think about that sense, that perception that we're receiving, and we don't pause and realize that that's not necessarily just a flag of truth telling us something that's truly happening, it's a flag of what we believe is happening. And so that when you feel the need to call this person stupid, an asshole, XYZ, you are trying to answer your signal. You're trying to categorize this person in a way that matches up to how you model the world. And that it's not just in calling people stupid. It's in the way that if you want to call them a hero, you need to hypervalue them, value them above and beyond what the real world is giving you in order to feel comfortable with it. You go to other people who reinforce. That's fandom, fan clubs. That's the whole premise of that idea, is that we evaluate people and idolize and give value and certainty and ability above what they show us in the real world. And we need to experience that. We need to reinforce that, just as we need to reinforce the negative. Those two things are entirely tied to our perception. When we want to enforce and reinforce the positive feeling we get from the heroicness of somebody, the idolization of somebody, the crowd and the mob mentality, or not the crowd and the mob mentality, the reinforcement we get from community that also like this idea, is just as strong as the people who reinforce our negative. Like, man, you're right, this guy is stupid, he doesn't know what he's talking about. You're right to avoid him. This guy's a scam artist, XYZ. Whether it's true or not, we are following the path of the signal, what makes us more comfortable. Because we don't understand our perceptions are not 100% reflections of reality. They're reflections of what we believe reality is. They're reflections of the story we need it to be. We want it to be. It tells us right then and there, but we can only experience it separate from ourselves by being able to be paused, by being able to take a look at it and go, I can see how this works, but I'm not experiencing how it can work. I can have that separation. And there's ways to talk, there's people who talk about meditation, there's self-awareness, all this stuff. This is what I'm talking about. You don't have to go through any of the self-help nonsense. You have to go through all these other mantras or anything else. Just the act of understanding and giving pause to the perceptions and sensations and your salience, the things that come to your attention, and actually thinking about them and finding that you're going to find this discomfort is not something from the universe telling you that you need to be afraid. It's something from your universe warning you that you need to change your mind in order to accept this. Is that a very different context than what you've thought of before? And it was for me. It was completely different. This was what empowerment was. I went from experiencing uncertainty, doubt, displeasure, and all of the grip of alcoholism and other addictions, without any knowledge that these things that I was feeling weren't necessarily true, until I was able to believe that they weren't true, meaning that they didn't have this pull on me. Until I was able to let that go internally, I experienced them as true. It was hard for me. I kept getting drawn back to the bottle and darkness and sadness and reminiscing and being lost in my thoughts and not being able to sleep and all the negative things, right? But when I was able to accept and allow myself to be who I was, allow my history to have been, and who I want to be, I have to make now, I changed. It wasn't overnight, it wasn't snap of fingers, but it was deeply tied to what I'm exploring and what we're exploring, and that we are creatures of active inference, meaning we model our world, we predict the now, and that our experience is a reflection of that, not a reflection of the outside world against some magical entity that exists within us that then makes a judgment. It is all right there. It takes time and willingness to perceive it, because your perceptions are not direct reflections of reality. If they were, you'd be able to tell automatically. They're reflections of what you believe and you need to believe. And so that if this challenges you, that's fine. I don't have to be right. You can accept that maybe I'm wrong. But Do you need me to be wrong? Do you need the idea to not exist? Because that's what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about NPC-like behavior. That's the model. That's us not understanding that in order to handle the signal, we do all these things to minimize our error signal, minimize what we're experiencing. Because if something comes into your mind, to your salience, through your screen, through your life, and it is informative and it is potentially challenging, and for example, I'm not religious, but if I were to come across information that was, I saw a dude walk on water, come over, touch somebody they weren't able to walk before, and I mean, I'm seeing it before, and in every single way that I need to, in order to be convinced, I still don't know I could do it automatically. And that's not weakness, that's not silliness, that's because how you work as a creature of active inference is that you model the world, and you have to keep up what you believe. You have to, if it's something new or different, you have to update your model, you have to change, you have to reinforce it, you have to prove that it's true, right? That you're not just this free-willed creature, that sentience is a complex thing, that it's not just humans, that it is across the animal kingdom and the spectrum of life. And that's what we're going to explore in the next couple of episodes. So we're going to look at prehistory, our no bullshit real history, where we came from, our actual history, our documented history, when we went from being able to be tribal near animals to the sentient powerhouses that we are today, and to actually see and look at some of those transitions and what that might mean if we aren't just these self-reliant, free-willed creatures like their stories tell, and much more social animals that grew up in a very particular environment and spent hundreds and hundreds of millennia without written language, without known spoken language, without art, history, any of the sciences, and we functioned and flourished to the point of now. And there's a story there that we have to disavow and pretty much throw out in order to acknowledge some of the stories we have today. We have to literally do that. We have to, and I don't like that. I don't like that idea. And I find the power in seeing the real existence that our ancestors had, and that it, to me, is the final framework that helps solidify the reality that this is all true. That if this explains human cognition, active inference, embodied cognition, the extended mind, that everything human cognition is touched, meaning our history, our art, our society, you, how you think right now, how you feel right now, how we interact, language, everything, then those fingerprints should be there. And so far, I've seen them everywhere. And so what we're going to do is we're going to explore them in our past. And if you've liked what you heard so far, if you don't like what you heard so far, that's fine. Just please engage. Ask questions, put a thumbs up, share. The algorithm needs to think that you give a shit. Please like, subscribe, share, hit me up on X Self Gen Podcast. Until next time.